Welcome to Magic Minds. I'm your host, Evan, and today I don't have any of the rest of the crew with me. It's just me, and I'm going to be breaking down my Yawgmoth Thran Physician -1/-1 counter deck from episode 4. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. So, the commander, as I told you, is Yawgmoth Thran Physician, and Yawgmoth costs 2 and 2 black mana for legendary creature human cleric that has protection from humans and is a 2/4. Yawgmoth's first ability is you may pay 1 life and sacrifice another creature to put a -1/-1 counter on up to 1 target creature and draw a card. Then you can pay black and a black to discard a card and proliferate, and you can do either of those as many times as you want each turn. So this commander is very good for -1/-1 counters and some aristocracy stuff, and it has a draw engine on itself, which really allows this deck to get going. So I broke this deck down into about 9 sections that should explain the basics of the deck. So the first section is the combo, and this combo involves Yawgmoth and Nest of Scarabs, which is 2 and a black for an enchantment. Whenever you put 1 or more -1/-1 counters on a creature, create that many 1/1 black insect creature tokens. And then a card like Zulaport Cutthroat, Vindictive Vampire, Blood Artist, or other cards, which all say when them or another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. And Blood Artist is whenever Blood Artist or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So they're just the drain and gain little things that are standard for most Aristocrats decks. But how this combo works is you need Yawgmoth, Nest of Scarabs, and 1 of these aristocrat creatures. And what you're going to do is pay 1 life. You're going to need 1 creature to start off with, so you'll sack that creature to put a -1/-1 counter on a creature one of your opponent's controls and draws a card. And when you sacrifice the creature from Yawgmoth, Zulaport Cutthroat is going to deal 1 damage to each opponent, and you're going to gain a life. So you're going to break even on life after that. And when you put a -1/-1 counter on a creature, you create a 1/1 black insect. You can then sack that insect to Yawgmoth to repeat the process over and over again, and you will draw your whole deck, and hopefully you will drain all your opponents. So yeah, this combo is really great because it's one of those combos that you can have your commander for, and this is really useful because it's one of the 3 pieces that you're always going to have, and there's only 1 piece that you definitely need, which is Nest of Scarabs, and the other ones you can switch in and out for each other. And we do have quite a few tutors to help you get your combo pieces. And with that, it's on to the second thing, which is placing more counters. So in this deck, it's -1/-1 counters that you're going to be placing. And some of the good ones for this are Archfiend of Ifnir, which is 5 mana, 3 and a black for a creature demon with flying. Whenever you cycle or discard another card, put a -1/-1 counter on each creature your opponents control. It also has cycling for 2, and it's a 5/4. So how this works with Yawgmoth is that you can use its second ability to discard a card and then proliferate, and when you discard a card, you can put -1/-1 counters on your opponent's creatures, on every single one of your opponent's creatures, and you can proliferate. So it kind of doubles up that trigger, the proliferation trigger from Yawgmoth. So the second card for placing more counters is Midnight Banshee, which is 3, a black, and a black, so 6 mana in total, for a creature spirit. It's a 5/5 with Wither, which says this deals damage to creatures in the form of -1/-1 counters. So it's Infect without the poison counters. And it also says at the beginning of your upkeep, put a -1/-1 counter on each non-black creature. All your creatures are going to be black with the exception of maybe a couple colorless creatures. So it's not going to do anything to yours, but it's going to do a lot of -1/-1 counters on your opponent's creatures. And it makes it so that you can proliferate and hit all of your opponent's creatures with the proliferate trigger off Yawgmoth. Speaking of proliferating, the third section is proliferating. So I have 2 cards in this section just to show today, and the first one is Contagion Clasp, and that is 2 mana for an artifact, and it says when Contagion Clasps enters the battlefield, put a -1/-1 counter on target creature. But then you can pay 4 and tap it to proliferate. So extra proliferation triggers, and you can put a -1/-1 counter on a creature so that if you don't already have -1/-1 counters on those creatures, you can also proliferate with that. And this next one is really good as a dual purpose card, and it's called Spread the Sickness. It's 4 and a black for a sorcery, destroy target creature, then proliferate. So 4 and a black and a sorcery, it's not a very great rate for the destroy target creature, but when you add on the proliferate, it makes it playable, if not good, in this deck. The next thing that this deck needs is some -1/-1 counter payoffs, because this is a -1/-1 counter deck, so you need some payoffs for it. So some of the best ones are Necroskitter, which is 1 a black and a black for a creature elemental 1/4 with Wither, which again it deals damage to creatures in the form of -1/-1 counters. And whenever a creature an opponent controls with a -1/-1 counter on it dies, you may return that card to the battlefield under your control. That is just like a staple in any decks that are going to have creatures with -1/-1 counters dying, because you're just going to steal all their stuff. And this deck, if you have the creatures to sacrifice, you can do that for no mana, just life. So you can put 3, 4 -1/-1 counters on something and take their really powerful card that they just played. Instant speed, not to mention. The next card is Crumbling Ashes, which is 2 and a black for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, destroy target creature with a -1/-1 counter on it. So this goes really well with Yawgmoth, because the thing about Yawgmoth is that 1 life is only for 1 -1/-1 counter. But with this, you can use that -1/-1 counter to kill something. So, for example, you could wait until the person before you's end step, so no one knows who you're going to be hitting with it, and then you're going to put a -1/-1 counter on something on end step, and then on your upkeep, you blow that up. And another good card is Blowfly Infestation, which is 2 and a black for an enchantment. Whenever a creature is put into a graveyard from play, if it had a -1/-1 counter on it, put a -1/-1 counter on target creature. So this is kind of like Necroskitter, except in a different fashion. Probably not quite as good, but it just allows you to take those -1/-1 counters on the things you killed and put more on so that you can just keep an engine going of killing things with -1/-1 counters on it. And this could work really well if your opponent got a bunch of 1/1s, because then you could put a -1/-1 counter on it, it would die, and then you'd put a -1/-1 counter on their next 1/1, and it would die. So if someone did something where they got a bunch of 1/1s, you could kind of just blow them out that way. And the next section we have is Token Faughter. So you're going to need these tokens to be sacrificing to Yawgmoth a lot, as ways to keep that engine going and keep killing things whenever you want, because you're always going to have life unless you get too low. So it's really the sacrificing that you might run into some trouble with. Some of the best token fodder or token creators in this deck. One of them is Endrick Sar Master Breeder, which is 4 and a black for legendary creature Human Wizard. Whenever you cast a creature spell, put X 1/1 black Thrall creature tokens onto the battlefield, where X is that spell's converted mana cost. And then there's text at the bottom that says, whenever you control 7 or more Thralls, sacrifice Endrick Sar Master Breeder, and it's a 2/2. So this is really, really good for this deck especially, because for the most part, you won't have to do the sacrifice Endrick Sar thing unless you play a really big creature, which I'm not sure there's even that many of in this deck. But because you can always sacrifice Thralls in response to casting the thing, so you're never going to go above 7, and you'll always have that Thrall engine. So the next one is a bit like this, with Oath Imancer, not sure how to pronounce that, and it's 2 and a black for creature Human Shaman. At the beginning of each upkeep, if you control no snakes, put a 1/1 black snake creature token with Death Touch onto the battlefield. So same thing with Endrick Sar, you're at the beginning of your upkeeps, if you do it right, you're never going to have a snake, because you can sacrifice the snake and ping your opponent with -1/-1 counters. And these snakes have a really big bonus of Death Touch, so you can play your snake and just hold it there as a scary blocker that can eat their giant thing as long as their thing doesn't have first strike. And then on end step, you just sacrifice it, and then the next upkeep, you get another 1/1. It's the beginning of each upkeep, so that's your opponent's upkeeps too, so you can get a lot of triggers that way. And the last one to talk about in token fodder is one that's a little bit different because it's a bit conditional, but it's also really good. So it's Pawn of Ulamog, 1 a black and a black for a creature, vampire, shaman. When Pawn of Ulamog or another non-token creature you control dies, you may create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token. It has sacrifice this creature, add waste to your mana pool. If you kind of need to get an engine going where you need to sacrifice your non-token creatures, and that will allow you to get some token creatures which you can also sacrifice or use to get some better stuff onto the battlefield. We also have some graveyard payoffs for if you end up having to sacrifice your real creatures. We have a couple graveyard payoffs in this deck. So one of the best ones is Mausoleum Secrets, which is 1 and a black for an instant with Undergrowth, which is a mechanic that says search your library for a black card with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. Reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. You're going to have a bunch of creatures in your graveyard, and all your things are black. So with just a few creatures in your graveyard, you could search up some of the best cards in your deck. For example, Nest of Scarabs to get your combo going is just really good and will really allow you to get engines rolling. And it's only for 2 mana, and it's not that expensive of a card in money either. So that will be a really good one for this deck. And another really good one for this deck is Thrilling Encore. It's 4 and a black for an instant. Put onto the battlefield under your control all creatures in all graveyards that were put there from the battlefield this turn. So this is kind of really crazy, and it can be good board wipe protection too. So you're sacking a bunch of creatures, and you go off and sack them all, kill a bunch of your opponent's creatures, and that's without any mana because you're only losing life. Then you play this and get all the creatures back, which is just enough to swing the game in your favor and put you way ahead of opponents. Along with graveyard payoffs, there are some creatures that go better than others to sack. So the next is some sackable creatures that you would want to be sacrificing to Yawgmoth. So the first one is Core Prowler, which is 4 mana for an artifact creature horror with Infect, which is this creature deals damage to creatures in the form of -1/-1 counters and to players in the form of poison counters. And then it has the second line of text, which is what we're really looking at, which is when Core Prowler is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, proliferate. And it's a 2/2. So you play it for 4, maybe you could wait a turn, swing with Infect, get some -1/-1 counters on some opponent's creatures, and then you can sack it to Yawgmoth and proliferate and boost up all those -1/-1 counters on your opponent's stuff, getting them smaller and closer to dying. And another good sackable creature is Butcher Ghoul, which is 1 and a black for a creature zombie with Undying, which is when this creature dies, if it had no +1/+1 counters on it, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it. So if you have no +1/+1 counters, it comes back with a +1/+1 counter. And this is like really good because for 2 mana, it's double sacrifice. So you sack it once, and it comes back, and then you can sack it again. And that's just a really good rate for 2 triggers. So the second to last section is Wither/Infect creatures. So you've already seen a couple creatures with Wither/Infect, but these are a couple more that would just let you get more -1/-1 counters on your opponent's creatures. So the first one is Plague Mirror, which is 2 mana of any color for an artifact creature mirror with Infect, and you can tap it to add 1 mana to your mana pool, and that's a colorless mana. It's a 1/1. So you play it turn 2, and just use it as a mana rock for a little bit, swing at someone, get some -1/-1 counters on, and it's just a really good value that you can accrue over the course of a couple turns with this card. Next card is Flesh Eater Imp, which is 3 and a black for a creature imp with flying, and it has Infect, and it has sacrifice a creature, Flesh Eater Imp gets +1/+1 until end of turn. And it's a 2/2. You'd have to sack some of the creatures that would want to sacrifice with Yawgmoth, but that could be worth it. Say he gets in, and then you have enough creatures that you can just kill someone with Infect as an alternate win con. or blow someone's creature out when they weren't expecting it with -1/-1 counters, or just whittle it down so that you could sack other creatures to Yawgmoth. The last card in this section is Lockjaw Snapper, and it's 4 mana for an artifact creature Scarecrow with Wither, and it says when Lockjaw Snapper is put into a graveyard from play, put a -1/-1 counter on each creature with a -1/-1 counter on it, and it's a 2/2. So it's proliferating, but only for -1/-1 counters, which is good, and it has Wither, so you can get just some more -1/-1 counters on creatures. And with that, we're nearing the end of the episode, but we still have one more section, and this section is maybe even the most important. This is the motor. So this would be card draw, this would be ramp, and this would be removal spells to keep your opponents out of the game. So the first card draw spell we have is Vilus, Broker of Blood, which is 5 black, 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 so 8 mana in total, for an 8/8 with flying, and you can pay 1 mana and pay 2 life. Target creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. But the real thing that it's in here for is whenever you lose life, draw that many cards. So whenever you lose that 1 life, you're going to draw a card in addition to the card you're drawing with Yawgmoth. So that 1 life you pay, which isn't very much in a 40 life game, is going to draw you 2 cards, which is a crazy rate. And not to mention, this guy's an 8/8, so he's a pretty big body. And he has flying, so he could hit pretty hard. So the next card is a piece of ramp, which is Black Market. It's 5 black, black for enchantment. Whenever a creature dies, put a charge counter on Black Market, and the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, add black mana to your mana pool for each charge counter on Black Market. So this is just a way to accrue value, even more value, from sacking all those creatures. Every time you're going to get a charge counter, and it comes out soon after Yawgmoth, and it'll just accrue you so much value and push you way ahead of your opponents. So the next card we have is a piece of removal that I think goes really well with this deck. Maybe not as well with some other decks, but in this deck it's just so good. It's Tragic Slip, and it's 1 black for an instant. Target creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn, which seems bad, but it also has Morbid. That creature gets -13/-13 until end of turn instead if a creature died this turn. So all you have to do is sack 1 creature, and that turns this into a 1 mana kill spell on most creatures, not to mention instant speed. That is just a crazy rate for such a powerful card, and you cannot underestimate how much of a swing that could give you in a game. So next is another good removal spell, and that is Malicious Affliction. It's black, black for an instant. It has Morbid. When you cast Malicious Affliction, if a creature died this turn, you may copy Malicious Affliction and choose a new target for the copy. And what it does is destroy target non-black creature. So for 2 black, you can kill 2 non-black creatures, which is a really good rate and could really just slow someone way down or kill 2 commanders or really anything you need it to do. So the last card I'm going to talk about today is Cryptghast, and it's 3 and a black for a creature spirit with Extort, which is whenever you cast a spell, you may pay 1 of either black or white. If you do, each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain that much life. And it says, whenever you tap a swamp for mana, add 1 black to your mana pool. And it's a 2/2. So this is really good because most of the lands in this deck are basic swamps, because it's a monocolored deck, so you can do things like that. And Extort, even though it says you can pay white or black, you can still use it in the deck because that pay that much is in parentheses. I just think this deck is really powerful deck with that combo, and a really fun deck. It's a little bit control-y and also a bit aristocracy, also with some -1/-1 counters. It's kind of a cool mix of everything. And yeah, so make sure to like, subscribe, and check out the other extended deck techs from my fellow Magic Minds. Keep magic on your mind. See ya!